Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Before we dive into the episode, I want to share that this will be my last episode of 2022. I am taking the rest of the year off to refresh and reboot for 2023. So happy holidays and happy new year, friends. Rose Skeeters, host of the podcast From Borderline to Beautiful, is here on the show to talk about her therapy practice, her podcast, and we also talk about the problems stemming from today's culture with the you do you messages that are everywhere right now. We also talk about her fears that she had surrounding starting her podcast, but out of wanting to serve and help others, she decided to be courageous and hit that record button. And now with over 600,000 downloads, Rosa's message is reaching those who really need to hear it. And this is just a little reminder that the world needs your good stuff. So whatever you're wanting to share with the world, get going. And if you need support, coaching, or just help getting started, I want to encourage you to set up a consultation call with me. And the link in the show notes is there to get that call set up. All right, let's jump into the episode. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I am super excited to have my friend and colleague, Rose Skeeters, back on the show. Welcome back, Rose. It's awesome to have you.
Thank you. It's awesome to be back.
Yeah, I think last time you were on the show, we talked about how to handle burnout when you work for an agency. I learned a lot from that episode, and just staying in connection with you, I continue to learn a lot. So I'm really glad you're here. We are going to shift a little bit, and you're going to share a little bit about your story, right? And how you got to where you are today. And I'll just let you introduce yourself and jump right on into it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, we talked about burnout. Great episode. And that was so long ago. I feel like I was working in community mental health or had just come from working in a community mental health environment because we met doing Joe Sanok's practice of the practice, right? Yeah. Some masterclass stuff. So my story is really linked to having a history of trauma and mental illness. And in that mental illness and trauma and borderline personality disorder, more specifically, and I had struggled with some eating disorder stuffs in my teens, early 20s, led me to a psychology degree, basically, because I was on a journey to figure out and find out who I was and what was wrong with me. And in that process, I did get a degree. So I am a licensed professional. I have a master's degree in clinical counseling. Before I jump into the mental illness and recovery side of my story, so I just wanted to put that out there. I am licensed in Pennsylvania. Hopefully I'll be licensed in Michigan here soon in a couple of days. So that's pretty exciting to have licenses in multiple states. I'm also a mindset coach, and I am the CVO of Thrive Mind Body LLC, which is an online counseling and coaching practice. I also help my husband in his business, our practice of Skeeters Strength Mindset Coaching Systems. And I'm the host of a podcast called From Borderline to Beautiful. And so how I got from having mental illness and eating disorder stuffs and to that today where I have this podcast is really what I want to focus on. And,
Yeah.
How's that, Lisa, for an intro?
I love it. I have been, it's so awesome. You and I connected pre-pandemic through Joe's group. You were one of the mentors, I think. And I don't know, we just struck up a friendship. And ever since then, I just love watching what you're doing and how you're helping people. I mean, I remember before you started Borderline to Beautiful and just, should you start, you were wondering like, should I start this? It's on my heart. I don't know. And I was like, go for it. See what happens. So how many downloads have you had to this day? This is amazing.
679,000 and something. Yeah, I just published today. So yeah.
Yeah. So I got to give a major plug for your show. It helps me. I love because you give skills, you give stories. You're very knowledgeable on the whole borderline personality disorder. Yeah. So all right, let's talk about your story a little bit more. Tell us what life was like for you when you had BPD.
Well, life was exactly what you would think of it to be if you're a clinician listening to the show and you're familiar, you have clients with BPD or you've heard stories and the stigma. It's intense. I mean, when you have borderline personality disorder, you have a very, I had a very strong grasp on emotional reality and not a very fluid grasp on logic and emotion and that wise mind that they talk about in dialectical behavioral therapy, which led to a life of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a firmly rooted identity. Like I thought I knew who I was. And if you would have asked me at the time, I probably would have told you, yeah, I know who I am, but I didn't. I didn't have any moral values. Didn't believe in anything. I would mirror my behavior to the people around me, which is, all hallmarks of the diagnosis. And in an attempt to escape and avoid emotional discomfort, I would do destructive things like, engage in eating disorder behaviors and can be in and out of the hospital. I would cut myself to have that physiological parasympathetic nervous system response that people get from cutting to decrease that emotional intensity. I had an underdeveloped theory of mind with frontal lobe deficits. So I had a hard time with executive functioning skills like task initiation and planning and organization and missing social cues and emotional control, very impulsive. So all of that,
Mm-hmm.
is a clinical way of just saying I was chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
very chaotic in the way that I was living. And yeah, I mean, it's a stark contrast from who I am today and who I've come to be and what I had to do to get from being that person to being someone who, I don't struggle with any of those issues anymore. I am a hyperbolic person because when you do have borderline personality disorder, you are definitely highly sensitive in temperament. Hyperbolic temperament is something that they talk about at McLean, where they're doing a lot of research, McLean Hospital, on borderline personality disorder, which just simply means that, as a young child, my amygdala is overactive. Let's just, kind of simplify it a little bit. So, overactive amygdala, frontal lobe deficits, and just being kind of, sensitive. And so I still have that left.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I want to know how you cope with that or how you handle that.
Yeah. So whenever if you think about like the bell curve of normal
Mm-hmm.
development, right, or the curve of people, right? Everyone has variations in their temperament and the way that they perceive the world, and we're all individuals, right? And so having a highly sensitive temperament or a hyperbolic temperament doesn't have to be something that's disordered. It's something that you can just say, okay, well, this is how I respond and react and feel.
Mm-hmm.
However, that is not how everyone else responds and reacts and feels. So I deal with that by having a care plan for myself, just like you would if you had a regular temperament. Maybe your self care is like a bath, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely wouldn't be my self care. My self care might be, I don't know, listening to music and rocking back and forth or something like that. Or it might be like something impulsive but fun, like dancing or running, or like we really like to play basketball. I'm 39 and you'll find me like playing basketball. So some of the behaviors I do and things I do, I've just learned to, embrace who I am,
Yeah.
be an individual and not hurt anyone around me and not assume that everyone perceives the world through a sensitive lens.
Yeah. Okay. That's really helpful. Thanks for explaining that. So, how did you decide to get treatment or get help, or what finally happened that you were like, I can't live like this anymore?
Mhm. Well, much like the stigma, unfortunately, in people with borderline personality disorder, I was pretty resistant to help. Being honest, I was in the hospital when I was 15 after a breakup. I had looking back on it, I had a good life. I had parents who cared about me. I mean, they had their own emotional instability. So having emotional instability and having like a tendency towards being sensitive, they're just not good. It ends up being a perceived abusive environment because and it's invalidating, right? So I had a breakup and it was like the end of the world, right? So I'm cutting myself, I end up in the hospital. Even at that time, I wasn't really kind of like doing anything for recovery. I was a kid, I was 15, and I was more focused on, cutting and then having, at that point, my identity was in sadness. So I was listening to sad music and not trusting people, running away, doing a lot of intense things. And Fast forward to being in college, where I actually was a clarinet performance major, which is kind of funny to think about. That's how I ended up in college, as a clarinet performance. But I just went from being in this very controlled, strict environment at home to college. So I just did anything and everything that felt good
Mm-hmm.
pretty much all the time, not a hyperbole. So I was taking my thyroid medication more than I should, because I had learned that that made me lose weight, and that led me to have an eating disorder, and I was really sick. I could really, hurt myself. So I was in medically fragile and in the Renfrew Center, which is an eating disorder treatment facility. And this is while I'm in school. And, I recovered, and I just remember feeling, while I was in recovery at the time, I remember feeling like, wow, this is so amazing. These people really love me. These people are just so kind and supportive. So I ended up taking on the identity at that point now, not just of sad girl and who cuts herself, but of like eating disordered girl. So anytime I was in a position where I needed more validation or I couldn't handle myself, I would then like create this eating disorder, and I would be in and out of hospitals for that, which is, pretty interesting to talk about in a way
Right.
that's not, I mean, that's, it sounds crazy, and it is, right? I'll label myself as that. It definitely is.
Mm-hmm.
But that was my attempt to escape reality, to handle my emotions, and to get the love and validation that I thought I didn't have or just couldn't feel, because I was just so intense and sensitive. And, after that, I got to the point where I was like, well, I'm done with this game. I really don't want to play it anymore. And I want to figure myself out. And I had art therapy and group therapy. I mean, everything. But I didn't trust anyone. I didn't listen. I didn't want to hear what anyone had to say. So I ended up getting a job working with children with autism, and I just fell in love with it, and that became something that was like functional and adaptive and good for me. And I wasn't engaging in anything too destructive at the time, but I had pretty poor romantic relationships. And then I decided I wanted to be in a doctoral program, so it kind of progressed from there. And while in the doctoral program, I started waking up and learning a lot about what my issues were,
Mm-hmm.
and really working on myself at that point, learning about choices, and learning about self-control and impulse control, and
Mm-hmm.
how to overcome. And even at that time, because I had an underdeveloped theory of mind, which is this inability to look at the big picture and have deficits in cognitive empathy at the time, I still had a hard time really grasping some of my issues, like what selflessness is, why morality is important, why you should have a moral code. Some of those things are fuzzy to me, and we weren't exactly learning that in the program, because it's a humanist program, so it doesn't necessarily talk about that. So fast forward to wanting to get married, right? So I found someone who was a strong individual, very secure in who he is, Jay, and he's actually, my husband does some episodes on the podcast if anyone's interested in checking that out. And he became this, what we call a corrective relationship. So someone to help me see those deficits, my blind spots, which then allowed me to go on a journey to learn how to mentalize, to have cognitive empathy while in romantic relationships when my emotions were high, which then led me to having a moral code and then recovery.
Need continuing education contact hours? If so, then be sure to check out my popular pod courses. Currently, there are 12 to choose from, and there are a variety of topics. You can learn more about eating disorders, addiction treatment, Lyme disease and mental health, how to be an adoption resource, plus much more. And I'm giving you your first one for free. However, this free offer will be going away in 2023, so head to my site and sign up for a free pod course before it's too late. Once you sign up, I'll email you a code that you can enter at checkout to get your first pod course at no charge. You can listen anytime, anywhere, and when you're ready, purchase the course, take the self-study quiz, pass it, and then download your certificate of completion. It's simple, yet if you have any questions, please get in touch. And by the way, Mustard Consulting LLC is a NBCC approved provider. Wow, that is a story. I mean, gosh, thanks for going back. And I mean, I know that you explained it in a handful of minutes, but I can only imagine the years of just awakening. It sounds like you just had this huge awakening, and I love that. And yeah, I mean, I think so much of what you just shared, I can relate to, and I can tap into, my own journey of having a corrective relationship and being in relationships where I was so emotionally just all over the board and reactive and morality. I mean, all those things that you brought up. And going to grad school was, for my degree was a big aha moment in a lot of different ways. So, and I think a lot of us therapists, we have those moments, and yeah, just, learning from it and growing and evolving is what we're here to do. So, okay, I want to know how you decided to focus on borderline personality disorder as your area of expertise. Is that how you started?
No,
Oh,
no.
okay.
You mean in terms of starting out as a clinician? No,
Yeah,
but
yeah, okay.
in business, that's how I started. Yeah. So starting out as a clinician, I just did general, like I guess general practice. So I had my son while I was in the early stage of my doctoral program. So I went all the way through, like right up until the end, but then I ended up going and just getting a master's degree. So at that time, I was, had learned so much. I'm so grateful to have been in that doctoral program because it did change the way that I had practiced, and I was able to do sort of general
Hmm.
practice. But I noticed that during that time that all of the people who were coming to me who were emotionally intense were the people that I did the best work with because
Hmm.
I, connected so much and I was able to tell them and share with them the clinical knowledge in a way that could be understood by what I call the BPD brain,
Hmm.
right? Through the lens of someone who's also hypersensitive. And that came, that's where I started thinking about, oh, maybe I should, have my own business. That'd be something where I could really have people come to me that would be within my niche,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then we talked about hyper niching. And that's how you and I, Lisa, came to talk about this BPD. And I was like, oh gosh, okay, this is a little embarrassing, but I had BPDs, right? And I want to, maybe I should talk about that. And you're like, yeah, go for it. And so I just did. I
Amazing.
just did.
Yeah, and almost 700,000 downloads later. Oh my gosh. Like I'm so thrilled for you. You're helping so many people, and I've listened to so many of your episodes, and they're just, I mean, even for people who don't have BPD, it's just good stuff. It's just skill building. It's good, sharing of the lessons that you've learned, what your clients have learned. I highly recommend your podcast to
Thank you.
to everybody. Okay, so what does your business look like nowadays with the podcast and coaching?
Well, just like we talked about a little bit before, being hyperbolic, it definitely played into the progression of my business. So when you and I had talked about the podcast, I definitely did not think that a podcast about borderline personality disorder, of me telling my story,
Mhm.
would take off in the way that it did. So I just got my cell phone and started talking into it, right?
Yeah.
Pretty, it's, I guess, I don't know necessarily, it wasn't an impulsive choice. I did it with, thinking about it, though I think I, would have made some systems. So right now, the business is like, is I have a podcast. I try to release one weekly if I can. And we have a website, and people go to the website and they can book with me directly on the website. And then I'll send them a link to our electronic healthcare platform. And, people will work with me individually through coaching. So I don't offer counseling because if you listen to the podcast, I'm already telling my story. So you already have a lot of information about me, and I want to be able to offer supports for people that want to look forward and walk with me in a journey towards positive care and mental wellness.
Hmm.
So I operate a coaching business, and it's an online coaching business. Yeah, with coaching sessions. I also offer group
Hmm.
sessions that kind of roll throughout the year that requires a screening process and an application so I can make sure that I'm grouping people appropriately
Hmm.
that are
Hmm.
appropriate for an online group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's amazing. So, and that's your full-time thing. That's what you do.
my full-time thing. Yeah. And in the meantime, when I talked about systems a moment ago, we're also have some things in place to transition the business to have some better systems. We're going to offer video courses so that some of the things that I talk about on the podcast are put more into a course format that people can watch, because borderline personality disorder, with the deficits that come with it, requires repetition for learning. So to be able to have a coherent place for where people can go and look at the step-by-step processes would be awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we're doing now.
That's awesome. So eventually you'll have like a platform where people can see the videos. And so, I mean, you're helping so many, and it's so smart. Like, you're thinking this through, your audience and you know what they need. I love that. Okay. Anything else on the horizon for you guys?
I'm writing a workbook, which is, it's taken some time to do it for sure, because I love helping people. So the more, when people want support, right, when I get emails or new clients or, what have you, I will devote more time to that than to the workbook. But I do love writing it. I'm halfway through, which is so exciting. And I'm also just writing a book.
Oh man, gosh.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I've missed that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, we can talk. I just wanted to address a little bit about the stigma for, people with borderline personality disorder in general. So first of all, if you're a clinician listening and you have struggled with borderline personality disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or, emotionally unstable personality disorder, any of those, it's important to understand that in your authenticity and your genuineness comes the best treatment care for the people that you are connecting with. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, be like me, tell everybody your story, but I do, think it would be beneficial for you to begin to accept that this is something that isn't, doesn't have to have the level of stigma that it has. And if you're open, to accepting that about yourself, it can really help you relate and connect to your clients and even to other clinicians. And if you're a clinician that doesn't have any of those diagnoses, really understanding that borderline personality disorder, like any other mental illness or disorder, it comes from trauma in the past. It comes from somewhere. It's not bred out of nowhere. So if there's somebody that you have that's acting out or yelling or screaming, obviously it's inappropriate behavior on their part, but that's why they're there. That's why they're with you. Talking about talking about your clients and supervision in a nasty way, or, in a way that stigmatizes the diagnosis, is important to be aware of, and to, really start fighting back against that. Because Lisa, you and I were talking at the beginning of the episode about how, I was saying how, people with borderline personality disorder are almost being bred in society, right? The message to the younger generation is do whatever your emotions tell you to do whatever that feels good. And you don't have to talk to people that make you feel uncomfortable, and if you're triggered, you should avoid that. And unfortunately, avoiding emotions, being emotionally impoverished, is one of the things that leads to having these emotionally intense and dysregulated disorders, right? What do you think, Lisa?
No, I totally agree with you. And that's that's really important for us to highlight and to talk about. Yes, I mean, I noticed that with just today's society and the generation, our kids, really, the kids, because our kids are the same age. Not that our kids are dealing with that, but when they do have an emotional reaction or they are triggered, it's like helping them understand and not just letting, oh, it's okay, you go be emotional, you go whatever. It's like the whole thing about you do you is, I get it. Like, I understand, we want to raise independent children who know who they are and stand for what they stand for, but we want to do it with a moral compass. We want to help them with their moral compass, because like you and me, you and I have talked offline or off podcasting about how no beef with my parents, I didn't have really a moral compass. It was like, this is what we do. This is who we are. You don't question it. And so I didn't really understand that. Like, I didn't know what I stood for. Nobody ever encouraged me to think about it, because this is who we are and this is what we do in this family. And if you go outside of that, it's like you become talked about. So it's easier to stay in line.
Yeah.
Kind of going off on a tangent here, than it is to have a safe space or feel like you can explore those emotions. Sometimes it's just shut down. So I guess what I'm getting at is it's complicated. It's really complicated because our kids are getting messages all over the place, social media, in the school. Now, not all the time and not everywhere, but as parents, we have to be involved, and we have to know what they're looking at and where they're getting messages from. I don't know. I just
Yeah.
kind of went off on that, but yeah, I agree with you.
No, I agree 100%. No doubt, especially coming from, I feel like I can offer that unique perspective because from someone who had chaotic borderline personality disorder, I mean, I was so sad as a 15-year-old little girl that I'm like taking, cutting myself. And if you think about that for a minute, you think, well, why? It's not just, it wasn't just temperament. Temperament, right? We look at the biopsychosocial model to describe, the precipitating events and things that surround, the development of mental illness. And it was also because I didn't have emotional richness, emotional fitness, and emotional control.
There you
We
go.
want to be rich, fit, and control. If we are emotionally impoverished, it means that we only have a couple of things, a couple of words that we use for emotion. We can't talk about it, it triggers us. We're
Hmm.
either all in our feelings or not in feelings at all. We want to have balance and we want to learn how to control our emotions through having a range of emotional words we can use,
Hmm.
looking at the intensity. And we want to teach that to our children, which really does negate the you do you world, unfortunately, because there are a lot like I'll try to speak to my clients about the importance of timeouts. And there's this push of like timeouts are, I don't know, somehow abusive or something. And I get it. We don't want to put our children in rooms and lock them away. I mean, that's just extreme. But
Hmm.
when you teach a child, hey, if you're really upset, go ahead and be safe and go and be safe alone for this amount of time, we're teaching children at that point that their emotions come and go.
Hmm.
But when you tell a child that it's okay to avoid their triggers, then you teach a child that they will not have that emotional richness, fitness, and control, and
Right.
that they should avoid emotions. And
Hmm.
emotional avoidance leads to emotional episodes, dysregulation, and a host of physiological, relational, social, spiritual issues. And so, being someone who works with people with borderline personality disorder who had it, who's in recovery, and someone who has also a child, it's so important that we as clinicians fight back against some of the really irrational, extreme ways that people are talking and thinking about emotions because it just breeds more disorder.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. You really did. And I hope that, if you're a clinician and you're listening, and I mean, my hope is that you really think on that and analyze, your own stuff and your worldview and the lens that you see this world through. And just remember that. I don't know. I don't know what else I want to say, but it's pretty complex. And I feel like nowadays it's really easy to just turn your head. It's because it's easier. It's easier. It's
Mm-hmm.
so much easier than to just avoid and enable than it is to discuss and really learn how to connect and communicate and repair. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Lord knows I have my moments with my child. And anytime I have some type of emotional outburst with my daughter, I have to do my own work on that. And then, eventually I come back and I repair and we talk and, we talk things through. But yeah, it's really tough. It's tough out there, y'all. I guess what I'm trying to get
Yeah,
at.
absolutely. It
Yeah.
is. It is really tough. And I love what you said about that. Like look at the lens and
Mhm.
through which you view the world as a clinician. I was so hesitant to have a podcast about borderline personality disorder in the beginning. I just thought, gosh, what how will this affect me?
Mhm.
And in the moment between recording the episode after you and I had talked, Lisa, and you know, in that moment while I was deciding to record the episode, excuse me, I had to think, what's more important, me? Am I more important? Is my self-image, what people are going to think about me more important than helping people? And the answer is no, and it'll continue to be no until I was really blessed with the opportunity to be interviewed by a journalist from Counseling Today to talk about the stigma behind borderline personality disorder. So if you're a member of the ACA, you can check that article out. It was in the October issue
Mm-hmm.
of Counseling Today, just talking about the stigma of borderline personality disorder. And he had, from my perspective of how I had experienced it as both a patient in the past and as a clinician now. And, it's just very important that we go head first into speaking about the things that we are passionate about and that we know can impact change, because it might be something else for you. It
Mm-hmm.
could be like, some of the stuff that you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, on your podcast. It could be another disorder or another niche or hyper niche that you have as a clinician. And
Mm-hmm.
through that niche or hyper niche, maybe you'll be able at one point to speak about what you believe to be true on a platform where people will hear you. I was blown away reading that article, just crying, thinking, man, if I would have thought only of my image, of my bank account, of my business, of,
Right.
what me, then I would have never been in the position to be able to talk about, what I had gone through and to help other clinicians understand that they can be softer and kinder
Yeah.
and they can, give hope
Yeah.
to people with BPD. So, yeah, go head first. Be courageous.
Yeah. I love that message. And I'm so grateful for your authenticity and for your vulnerability and transparency, because it's oftentimes when I wonder about what am I doing and is this helping? I think about our conversations, even if it's over text, I like go back and I look at our text chats and I'm like, yeah, I mean, be who we are, be authentic, be vulnerable, know our limits and know our boundaries. And I think
Mm-hmm.
if the intention is to help more people, then you can't go wrong. Do it with ethics, of course, and do it with competency, but don't hold back. I mean, the world needs your good stuff. The world needs our our work, and so I'm just so grateful and thankful that you are doing what you're doing, because I know that it's really making an impact. So, if folks want to learn more about you, about your show, where should they head?
Head over to skeetersstrength.com. That's SKEETERSSTRENGTH.com. That's our coaching business website. If they want to hear the podcast, you can hear the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, just about anywhere where you can hear a podcast. It's called From Borderline to Beautiful by Rose Skeeters. One of my clients was actually so kind to make the artwork for it. So I really try to incorporate recovery, people in recovery who have recovered, and recovery stories into that work. So you can go check it out. It's a purple and green kind of logo
I love it.
with flowers on it. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's nice. I didn't know your client did that for you. That's really cool. Nice. All right.
Yep.
Well, okay. So before we dive out or done, is there anything else you want to share or like plug?
I just want, if you are somebody who's working with people with borderline personality disorder and you check out the podcast or you've listened to my work and you're interested in my content, and could you reach out and let me know if you'd be interested in a CEU course. I really want to toy around with that idea, and it would be helpful if I had some, clinicians reaching out and saying, yeah, this is what I would need. I would like help with, or yeah, it would be really great if you could teach us about this,
Okay.
kind of XYZ topic. And you can reach me at rose@skeeterstrength.com. Again, that's rose@skeeterstrength.com, or you can send me a call or voicemail or a text at 844-984-7483. That would be really helpful. So if
Okay.
any of the terms I used today were kind of like moral compass, how does that play in, or
Okay.
underdeveloped theory of mind, etc. Yeah, I would love to get some feedback there.
And I will put all of that in the show notes. So if you are trying to like write that number down, don't worry, it'll be in the show notes. You can just click in there and reach out to Rose that way. Well, Rose, I am just over the moon, happy and excited for you and all those that you're helping. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. It's great talking to you as always.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.